Welcome to Agatha Christie, She Watched, with Teresa Peschel. Today we're going to be looking at the Poirot episode, Five Little Pigs from 2003. And let me introduce Teresa. How you doing?
Hello.
So we saw the movie last night, and what did you think?
I thought it was wonderful. They really did a wonderful job. The entire book is essentially a series of conversations with Poirot about the past. And so they filmed the movie as a series of flashbacks as Poirot asks questions about what had happened 14 years before. It was 15, by the way, in the novel. Oh, and for those of you who are confused, it was called Five Little Pigs in the UK. In the United States, it was called Murder in Retrospect. So Five Little Pigs and Murder in Retrospect are the same novel. And this is where the novels can get confused, the films can get confused, and you don't realize that when you're watching what Mrs. McGillicuddy said, that you're seeing the 450 from Paddington. Well, that's the case here.
Yeah. It also didn't help that they didn't have any mention of Five Little Pigs in the movie itself.
Oh, that's correct. The only mention that we can see is there appears to be a scene in one of the flashback interviews, but in the background, if you look closely, there's little Lucy Crail with Mrs. Spriggs, the housekeeper, and it looks like they are making origami pigs. Paper origami pigs.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into what the book is about, what the show is about.
Well, I'll start with the Five Little Pigs, because, again, the film did not address the Five Little Pigs, despite Poirot putting it in his head in the text. And, in fact, he chided himself for getting hung up on nursery rhymes. But when you do the Five Little Pigs, if you're familiar with the rhyme, the first little pig is Philip Blake. He is Amyas Crail's best friend, and he is a stockbroker, and he's the little pig who went to market. The second little pig is Meredith Blake, Amyas Crail's other best friend, and he stayed home. He's the one who inherited the estate. The third little pig, who had roast beef, is Elsa Greer. And the contrast is very, very strong. When Poirot goes to interview Elsa Greer, she's become Lady Dittisham. It's implied in the film, one of those throwaway lines. In the text, it's spelled out that by the time she's married to Lord Dittisham, that's husband number 3. And she's probably going to be replacing him and moving up to becoming a duchess, and your grace. But look at the contrast between her and then pig number 4, which is Miss Williams, the governess. She's the little pig who had none, and it's pretty obvious that she is living in very tight circumstances in a flat just under the eaves where it is probably roasting all summer and freezing all winter, and she doesn't have much. And then the last little pig is Caroline Crail's half-sister, Angela Warren. And she cried wee, wee, wee all the way home. And at one point in her life, she certainly was screaming and crying, which was when Caroline Crail threw a paperweight at her and blinded her in one eye and disfigured her. So that's where the title comes from, even though you don't see it referenced in the film.
So we have the Crail family, which is Amyas. How do you pronounce that?
They said Amyas.
Amyas. So Amyas, who's the painter, Caroline, his long-suffering wife.
And what that woman has to put up with.
That's right. Lucy is the daughter, the young daughter who is, 7, 8 years old?
She's about 7 years old in this movie.
Right. And she's the instigator 14 years later. And then Carolyn's sister.
Half-sister. Carolyn's half-sister, whom Carolyn's father had died and her mother had remarried and had another baby, and that was Angela. And Carolyn resented the new baby. Very, very much so. And she had a difficult time controlling her temper and thus throwing the paperweight at the baby.
And ever since then, she's always kept herself very tightly wound, tightly suppressed, you might say.
She keeps herself under very tight control. Again, the film didn't bring this out, but the novel does. She wants to always be in control of herself. And several people remember her to Poirot, her saying that nothing could be worse than to cause harm to another human being because she did that. And she knows exactly how dreadful it was. She permanently scarred Angela. You know, something that Angela will have to live with, a disability that Angela will have to live with for the rest of her life. She can still see perfectly fine out of one eye, but the way her face looks, you're going to have people who will recoil when they meet Angela Warren, no matter how well-cultured, well-educated, well-connected, good-looking, smart, intelligent, capable person she is. All they'll see is that strange is her damaged eye and the scars around her eye, and they will immediately say, ew, and walk away.
They did a nice job of the makeup because when you see her, that is a very filmy prosthetics that they put over her.
They did a really good job. Usually with Hollywood, when they give you a disfigurement, they put a tiny birthmark and say, oh my God, look how disfigured this person is.
Yeah.
And they did a really good job with that.
Now, this is one of the later Poirots, late in the series, and this is where they were trying to make all these really seem more like movies. This was an hour and 33 minutes long, and it was very effective, the way they did, especially from when the starting.
Oh, yes. You start in the past with Lucy Crail, and she's happy, she's sunny, she's 7 years old, she's with her family, with her father and her mother, and that woman. Seeing it from her perspective, she has no idea what's going on. Mm-hmm. She has no idea what's going on, but as a viewer, you can see, problems are surfacing, and not just because we're in a Poirot movie.
Well, but then it jumps very quickly to Caroline writing something in a very gray...
In her prison cell.
It's in her prison cell.
And this is a change that the movie made. And it's, I think, more realistic than what Agatha wrote. What Agatha wrote, I go back and forth on this. What Agatha wrote is that Caroline Crail was convicted of murdering her husband, but because of the extreme extenuating circumstances, that is, her husband had moved the other woman into their own home, that she was not sentenced to hang. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison, and she died about a year later. Otherwise, all of her characteristics in the doc that everybody describes are the same as in the novel. In the film, she didn't get life imprisonment. She was sentenced to hang, and they hung her about a year later.
So the movie already starts out with a big dramatic contrast.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then we jump 14 years ahead, and Lucy Crail enlists Poirot into investigating the case.
And they did change her name, by the way, but I understand why, because Lucy Crail in the novel was named after her mother. She was named Carolyn, Little Carolyn, but they called her Carla, and so it does make more sense to switch her name to Lucy. Frequently, I have no idea why they do this, other than the scriptwriter has to do something in order to earn his salary, and so they change names that do not need to be changed.
Yeah, so then the rest of the movie, right up until the end, when Poirot does what I like to call the Poirot, gathering all the suspects and revealing who done it, is a series of interviews with the main characters and flashbacks to show us what happened.
And to show the flashbacks, they kind of shot them in a slightly sepia tone. Mm-hmm. The coloring looked a little different. The flashbacks did not look the same to me as the current day filming. The colors were a little more washed out. They weren't as saturated.
Right. And in addition to the sepia toned, they were also using handheld cameras, and the camera was acting as the point of view character, whoever was the subject of the interview. So they were talking to the camera as if that character was there.
Really? I didn't notice that. But then, hey, I'm not a film student, and I didn't take any film classes in college like you did.
And bored you for 30 years with tales of
Yes,
film
I
class.
took useful classes, such as sculpture. And here we are 30, 40 years later, and your film classes are turning out to be much more useful than my sculpture classes. But here we are.
But anyway, yeah, so it was really effective way of getting Poirot into the story. When does Poirot show up in the novel? Do you remember?
Poirot shows up in the novel at the very beginning because Lucy Crail, and I'm going to use the name Lucy throughout, because Lucy Crail goes to find him because she wants to know what actually happened. She's turned 21, and because she is now 21 and has control of her own money, and she has reached legal adulthood, she has been given the letter that her mother wrote her 14 years before, just before being executed, and she wants to know what happened. Lucy Crail comes to Poirot at the very beginning and says, find out what actually happens, and he tells her, I will find the truth. It may not be the truth that you want to hear, but I will find the truth.
Yeah.
And she's okay. She wants to know what actually happened.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this, that this was the perfect structure they should have used in the episode we talked about last time.
Oh, Murder in Mesopotamia. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Yes, because Poirot should have come in. I mean, you bring Poirot in at the murder, which is when he showed up in the novel for Murder in Mesopotamia, and then you could have done the entire story in flashbacks. The way they did it here, because that's what Poirot was essentially doing. He was interviewing people and trying to figure out what had happened in the past.
All in all, this was a great movie.
It really worked. It really worked. There, as I said, there were a couple of there were two questionable changes. One omission, I should say. There was a change that I thought was very questionable, and there was an omission. But other than that, it really worked beautifully all the way through. It's amazing how they were able to compress the novel into an hour and 33 minutes.
Yeah, without actually, although there was one omission that you wish they had put in.
Yes. Do you want to do the omission, or do you want to do the poor choice on the part of the scriptwriter?
Well, let's do the poor choice first, and then we'll tease them with the omission.
They made Philip Blake gay.
Ah.
Because apparently it is not possible for men these days to be good, dear friends, especially from boyhood, without having a sex component in it. And I did not like that. I did not like that. Philip Blake is not gay in the novel. I do not see why he needed to be made gay in the film just because he hadn't married, especially when you look at his relationship with Amyas, his older brother Meredith, who inherited the estate, and Carolyn Crail. Carolyn was the girl with the three boys. They were always together. They grew up together. Agatha not being that kind of writer. We're not talking reverse harem here. But she fascinated all three boys. They always loved her.
Yeah.
They always loved her, but she only had eyes for Amyas. So she didn't see Meredith and she didn't see Philip, even though they saw no one but her. You and only you.
And in the novel, Philip deeply mourned the loss of his friend.
Oh, yes. Both Philip and Meredith, Amyas's death at the hands of Carolyn destroyed them. It destroyed them emotionally. I thought the film actually handled another aspect of Philip's character very well. They also made him an alcoholic, and I could absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
If he's not an alcoholic yet, he's darn near close to being a functioning alcoholic, because every time you see him, he's taken another shot.
Yep.
But in the novel, he loves Amyas dearly. He loves Carolyn, but this is his best friend's wife, and so he's decided that the only way he can control the emotion is to decide that he hates Carolyn. And I can see that. And then there's a scene in the novel very close to Amyas's murder where Carolyn is seen coming out of Philip Blake's bedroom at night. And in the novel, if I remember correctly, Philip doesn't understand what's going on any more than anyone else does outside of Carolyn and Amyas. And so Philip sees Amyas is going to throw over Carolyn for that piece of jumped up trailer park trash. Elsa Greer. And this is his chance. And he asks her, and she says no. She turns him down flat. I will only ever love Amyas. And Philip is left even more angry than before because he opened himself up. He made himself vulnerable to Carolyn, and she said no.
And that's why it's kind of upsetting with all this drama that's already in the novel, already in the characters, to try to add a homosexual subtext is just so contemporary and so modern. And really, it's a cliche by this point.
It is a cliche by this point. It's the idea that you cannot have two men who are friends, that men cannot have a friendship without boinking each other like minks in heat. And that's not true. And I think it really limits men saying that you can't be friends.
Right.
I really think that.
So moving on to the omission that you wish they had put in.
And it was the painting. They say several times in the film how for Amyas nothing matters more than the painting.
And it should be said that Elsa Greer came to him asking him to paint her. And
yes.
That's why she's there at the house. Staying at the house, do you think?
She is actually staying at the house.
Okay.
And she met him at some function or other. She's a mill owner's daughter, someone who worked his way up and became very, very wealthy. And she's a very wealthy young
daughter.
She's her father's daughter. She's a very wealthy young woman. And she saw Amyas and she knew who he was. And she has a fascination with hero worship. This is all in the novel, by the way. She has a fascination with hero worship, and she saw him, and she was attracted to him in this wonderful, older, celebrated painter, virile and strong. And she's like 18 or 19 and thinking, wow, I want that. That's who I want. And she wanted to have her painting done. And there's some falderall about he is at first reluctant because he knows he's going to cheat with her because he's done that all his life. He's always been a horn dog. But what no one outside of the relationship of Amyas and Carolyn seem to grasp is that Carolyn is the only woman he actually loves. Everyone else is a receptacle for his lust. So he ends up painting her, and when Amyas is in the throes of creativity, nothing matters more than the painting. And so he will tell the subject of the painting, in this case Elsa, he will tell her anything she wants to hear in order for her to stay and pose until he finishes the painting. And after that, he'll throw her out because he doesn't need her anymore. And he doesn't care how she feels. He's a very self-centered man.
Mm-hmm.
The painting is the center of the novel, and he had just about finished the painting when he died, and Meredith Blake bought the painting, and that's what you're told in the text, that Meredith Blake bought the painting immediately so that it would not be put on public display. And Poirot looks at the painting, and then at the climax where he is revealing all, he does it in front of the painting, and he says specifically, the painting was the clue I should have seen, the most important clue at all, because you were looking at a painting of a woman watching her lover die. And she knew Elsa had poisoned Amyas. When she found out that he didn't care a button for her, she was merely a receptacle for his lust and his painting genius, and he didn't care what she felt about it, and he lied cheerfully to her. Oh, yes, of course, I'm going to leave Carolyn. Yes, of course, I'm going to marry you. Yes, of course, you can redecorate my house. He didn't care what lies he told, as long as she posed. He didn't care.
It was a slow-acting poison.
It was a very slow-acting poison. I'm going to say the word wrong, but it's conniving. It's got two eyes in the middle for some mysterious unknown reason. And it's the poison that was used to kill Socrates a millennia ago in Athens. And it paralyzes you slowly from the limbs out. So he was still able to paint even as he was losing feeling in his feet. And remember, nothing mattered more than the painting. And it's kind of hard to say if he knew she had poisoned him. He knew something was wrong. But of course, he probably never suspected poison. But Poirot looks at the painting, and what he sees is that Amyas Creel's painting genius came through in the painting itself. The artist is painting a woman who is watching her lover die.
It's that subtlety of painting that only the great painters can really do.
And we never saw this painting.
Yeah.
We saw glimpses of a painting in certain of the scenes, so they did have some staff artist paint it, but they could have given us something, because I know that in some of the previous Poirots, we had, and I'm thinking particularly 1-2 Buckle My Shoe, where they had this marvelous ripoff of a Tamara Lempicka painting in the background of one of the main characters. So I know that they could have done this. They could have gotten a credible artist, and it would have been good enough for television.
Yeah.
It would have been good enough for a TV movie. They would have had a painting. I wanted to see that painting.
Yeah.
And we didn't get that payoff, that huge emotional payoff. Now, they did do other things with the emotional payoff at the end, which is when Elsa Greer is revealed as the murderess, Philip Blake in particular. And this is where making him gay was really stupid, because he was horrified, because he's looking at Elsa and says, "You murdered Amyas. Carolyn was hung." And if he still loved Carolyn, he didn't just lose Amyas, he also lost Caroline, because Elsa Greer couldn't accept that a man lied to her. All I can say is, grow up, honey. That's what they do. And Meredith Blake, too. He was equally appalled. The other people in the room, they get up one by one. They look at Elsa Greer with horror and get up and walk out, because they do not want to be in the same room with that woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also at that point, what do you do? And of course, that leads to what you could almost expect to have, the
cliched ending where Lucy, who is now all grown up, comes back with a handgun and threatens to shoot Elsa. And Elsa is sitting there. Do it. Shoot me. My life is over. I ruined my life. I destroyed my life. I died the day that I murdered your father, because I didn't realize that when I killed him, I was killing myself.
That's in the book.
And yes, that's in the book. That is actually in the book. That's what she tells Poirot. And she realizes after she kills Amyas that she also couldn't reach Caroline either. Caroline was someplace else. And when Caroline died, whether she died on her own or whether she was executed by the crown, depending on whether you're looking at the book or the film, Caroline was out of her reach. She could no longer reach them. They were together.
Mm-hmm.
And she would always be outside of that golden circle.
Yeah.
And she also mentions to Poirot that when she was on trial, it was exhilarating. Mm-hmm. When she was testifying and people were screaming and newspaper reporters were after her and cameras flashing and her name and a picture in every paper along with a scurrilous write-up, she loved the attention.
Yeah.
She loved it, which is why when Meredith got over his passion for Caroline and decided he had to be the White Knight and rescue Elsa, he asked her to marry him, and she said, "Are you nuts?"
Yeah. Which I kind of think any sane woman would have said at that point. He wasn't really what you would call a very virile man, starting with his name.
Well, that's true, but at the same time, no, I think plenty of women would have looked at that and thought a nice, docile, rich, titled husband.
Well, just after his woman friend was convicted of murder, and she should have waited a little bit.
You wait a week or two.
You send a sympathy card, and then
you wait a week or two. But no, I would never say that any sensible woman, because lots of sensible women, like I said, they would see a rich, docile, titled husband. Docile and rich being the key words here. He'll be an easygoing husband.
That is true.
But it was a really great episode from start to finish. It really was. And it was good enough that even though we had distractions, such as my discovering a tick on my neck and having to stop the movie, I was able to fall right back into it.
Yeah.
And normally, if I'm going to find a tick crawling down my neck, I am not going to be able to focus on movies at all. But I was still able to.
And this was helped by the excellent cast, because we had Rachel Sterling as Caroline Creel. And if you don't know Rachel, you do know her mother, Diana Rigg. We also had Aidan Gillen as Amos Creel.
Amyas, yes.
Amyas, and you know him from
Game of Thrones. He was Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, and he has the most marvelous, distinctive voice, which is why when you hear his voice, if you've seen him in anything else, you know who he is just because his voice is so distinctive. And the same thing is true of Rachel Sterling. She has a rather distinctive voice.
Yeah, and there were certain moments when she was looking full face at the camera, and you could see Diana in her features.
Well, if you say so. I never pay any attention to that kind of thing myself. Well, I don't. I don't look at her and think, oh my God, that's Diana Rigg's daughter.
That's true.
I'm looking at her. I'm not thinking about her antecedents. And if I'm thinking about a particular actor or actress, then I'm going to think about I'm going to say, where have I seen that person before? Which is why when Amyas Creel, I was sure I'd seen him before. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, well, I had.
Yeah, we had for several seasons.
Several seasons of Game of Thrones, yes.
Yeah, and there were some of the other actors in there. They also had Christie connections. The actor playing Philip Blake, Toby Stevens. He appeared as George Pritchard in The Blue Geranium, the Marple episode. Right?
Yes, and that was an excellent episode.
That was also a very good one. And he was also in Then There Were None, the 2015.
That was the 2015 Sarah Phelps opus, and she did a marvelous job with that.
Yep, he did, as Dr. Edward Armstrong, which we should have recognized him.
Yeah,
we didn't really that much of a difference.
But this is what time will do to you, because this is a 2003 movie, and Then There Were None was 2015. That's 12 years.
Yeah,
and 12 years is a long time.
Yeah. Yep, I'm afraid so.
But it just really worked. It really worked on every level. And they managed to get almost every single thing in that was important. So you will not feel, unless you really know the book well, which I do, you won't feel that anything is missing or distorted. It still all works. Having Caroline executed by the crown instead of dying in the prison, either way, it works. If you don't know the novel, you aren't going to be concerned about Philip Blake being turned gay. If you don't know the novel, you aren't really going to notice that the painting doesn't show up, and you aren't going to be concerned that Lucy shows up somehow in somehow in the UK managing to pull out a lady's derringer out of her purse, out of her evening bag. I don't know where they get all of these.
She brought it home from the
She
war.
brought it back from Canada, clearly, because that's where she'd been. So she must have bought it in Canada and brought it with her to the UK just in case. Because I don't think ladies could go out and buy that kind of really shiny gold-plated accessory. I mean, it was definitely a lady's pistol. Well, was it a revolver or a pistol? I can't tell.
It's hard to get. I have to get a closer look at it. I would think a pistol. A revolver would have the barrel that rotates, and it definitely didn't have that, like a Colt 45.
Yeah, I can't remember which one it was, but it was a very nice, attractive, small, shiny, glittery ladies' handbag or a ladies' handgun to go in a nice ladies' handbag, and all it needed was, some rhinestones and bedazzling to finish the effect. But it works for a movie.
It works for a movie. Kind of rounds out the story very nicely, because after all, it was her story. She launched the whole thing with getting Poirot to investigate, and we get a scene of her at the end.
And it also shows her character as opposed to Elsa Greer's character, which is that Elsa Greer took away her family, but she doesn't murder Elsa in return.
Yeah.
Elsa couldn't get what she wanted, and so she murdered Amyas Creole.
Among the Poirots, how would you rank this?
Oh, this is right up there at the top. This is one of their best.
Yeah.
Absolutely one of their best. I've seen, how many are there? Like over 100?
There's about 70. 70 with David Suchet.
Only 70? Really?
Well, it
seems like I've seen a lot more by now.
We have seen a lot more.
I've seen a lot of them.
150 over the last 2 years. So.
But I would say this is one of the best of the David Suchets, and probably one of the best adaptations.
Yeah.
Too.
I would put it in the top 10.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. My as I said, my only quibble is they should have put the painting in.
Yeah.
They absolutely should have left the painting in, because it's made such a big deal about Amyas Creole being this fabulous painter, even a decade and a half after his tragic death by murder, which would certainly keep him in the museums for a long time. Mm-hmm. We don't see any evidence of his painting skills, and we should have.
Yeah, there was a mention, one of the paintings in the Tate.
Yes, but we should have seen that. We should have seen that. I can live with Philip Blake being turned into a gay man. I can live with that because, well, that's just what they do. And I can certainly live with the handgun at the end because, well, that's what movie makers do.
They didn't have a chase scene, at least.
But they didn't have a chase scene.
So there's
it's really quite amazing. They did not have a chase scene in a Poirot episode. I was really kind of expecting it, maybe with rowboats across the estuary, but they didn't.
And that wraps up another episode. We looked at Five Little Pigs this time and give it multiple thumbs up.
Oh, absolutely. Totally worth seeing.
Yep. So what's the next episode? Where are we watching next?
Let's see. Sunday, when I come back from Delaware, it's going to be Sad Cyprus.
That's right. Sad Cyprus. So let's hope they keep up in one in a row here after the disappointing murder in Mesopotamia. Let's hope they go for 2 in a row after this.
Well, you never know. Although I will say this for the Poirots, even when they have had truly terrible films, I'm looking at you, Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which was terrible, they always look great. Yeah. They're always well cast. They're beautifully filmed, wonderfully fabulous acted. Set design. They always look great.
Yeah.
So even if I can't say anything else about Sad Cyprus at this point, I do know it's going to look great.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Teresa.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure being with you, Bill.
And thank you all for listening to Agatha Christie, She Watched. And we'll see you at the movies. Agatha Christie, She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.